Good morning, everyone. Welcome to ReproUnion Fertility Awareness webinar on indications, intention, and attitudes towards family formation. My name is Eva Elmenstig, and I'm Associate Professor and Senior Lecturer in Sexology and Sexuality Studies at Malmö University. I'm a part of the ReproUnion Challenge 5 team and a member of the ReproUnion Executive Board, and I am the moderator of today's webinar, which offers an exciting program. I will start with a few words about ReproUnion. For a decade, scientists and clinicians have worked together across the Danish-Swedish border to bring reproductive research to the next level. In ReproUnion, we want to meet the demands of preventing, managing, and treating infertility. The project is supported by the EU program Interreg, and you can see all project partners on the slide. You can also see the 5 reproductive challenges which our public-private partnership is addressing. Today we will explore key findings from the research of one of the challenges, the Fertility Awareness Challenge 5. Some of our projects within Fertility Awareness Challenge 5 are multidisciplinary and includes both perspectives from medicine and social science. But before we begin with the first speaker, I will take a few seconds telling you about some holding matters. During the event, you will be muted. If you have technical questions, you can use the chat function. You are very welcome to ask clarifying questions to the speakers. You can do so by posting them in the Q&A section. We will have some time after each presentation, but also at the end. Please make sure to know to which speaker you are addressing the questions. And attention, for your information, we will be recording this webinar. And with this, I will give the word to my colleague, Søren Sibe, who is the chairman of ReproUnion Challenge 5 team and head of the fertility department at Rikshospitalet. Welcome, Søren. You may begin.
Thank you very much, Eva. And good morning, everybody. And thank you also from me for joining this webinar organized by Challenge 5. In Challenge 5, we are trying to facilitate debates and initiatives addressing our reproductive challenges. This includes also focus on the need for educational initiatives and for research initiatives identifying knowledge gaps in this area. Today, it's our pleasure to present the results from the latest 3 research projects, which is addressing very different topics ranging from male attitudes towards family formation, changes in reproductive challenges between different generations, and other types of diseases as a prognostic indicator for compromised reproduction. To set the stage, it's my task and pleasure to present to you for some of the background concerns leading to the formation of this fertility awareness program. Let's see. So, some time ago, I talked to a young woman who was criticizing a fertility awareness campaign that we had in Copenhagen. And she said a very precise sentence. She said, "It's really irritating that our biology hasn't adapted to the way we live today." That sort of encapsulates the whole problem behind the fertility awareness work, illustrating both that we live in another way today than we used to, and that our biology hasn't adapted. So there are many stakeholders when we talk about fertility awareness, and there is the personal perspective, there's the family perspective, but there is also a societal perspective, which we call reproductive sustainability, and it's illustrated by this sentence said by the Norwegian Prime Minister Erna Solberg in her New Year Address 2019, where she said, "Too few children are born in this country to sustain the Norwegian welfare model." So when we talk about fertility awareness, it's important to understand that the definition is very, very broad. It is both the understanding of reproduction and the related individual risk factors, it's lifestyle factors affecting our reproduction, and it is non-individual risk factors an example, environmental and workplace factors also affecting our reproduction. But the definition also includes societal and cultural factors affecting our options to meet reproductive family planning as well as family building needs. So we need to address this both from a personal, family perspective, but also from a societal perspective. So the mission or the goal of Challenge 5 is to ensure that young people have a greater understanding and awareness of fertility and of reproductive health, so they are equipped with the right information to make an informed choice about their own fertility journey. If we don't know, how can we take wise decisions for ourselves? But it's also the purpose to ensure that legislative and administrative bodies are equipped with the available evidence-based information, enabling prioritized decision making, also including reproductive consequences. And as a legislator, if you don't have the knowledge, how can you take the wise decision affecting other people? And finally, our mission is to develop and implement and communicate solutions and strategies addressing our shared reproductive challenges. Over the years, the number of children born in the world has dropped. This is presented as total fertility rate, meaning the number of children that a woman would give birth to during her reproductive life. And it has dropped by 50% since back in the 60s to now an average of 2.4 children per woman. This covers, of course, huge differences between different countries. In Nigeria, they give an average of 5, while in South Korea, every woman in average give birth to 0.9 children. If we're looking at our region, the Nordic countries, then in 2017, this stated that Swedish women's childbirth has declined during the recent years, but the authorities has no good explanation for the reason that caused this. It was at that time 1.78. Today, it's dropped further to 1.7. In Finland, in Iceland, in 2019, in 2019, a woman would give birth to an average of 1.35 children. This is a drop from previous years where it was 1.4 children. In Iceland, normally famous for having a lot of children, it has now dropped to 1.7 and has never been so low. Norway in 2017, they had an average of 1.62 children per woman, the lowest measured in Norway ever. And since that, it has only dropped further now to 1.53. So what is the reason behind this? I mean, one obvious answer could be that we just don't want to have children anymore. And this is very difficult to measure, but looking at the need for fertility treatment over the years in Denmark, it has been on a very sharp rise. And if we take this as a proxy for child wish, we have no indications that we don't want children. We have just developed a life causing problems for some people when it comes to having not only a child, but the children that they do want to have, the family they do want to have. The situation right now is that in Denmark, 1 in 5 men never becomes a father. 1 in 10 women that want to have children have either fewer children than they wished for or no children. And 10% of all children is now conceived at the fertility clinics. Looking at this curve, it illustrates the connection between the woman's age and the biology as live birth rate chance per cycle, illustrating that we are most fertile when we are in our early 20s, and it just goes straight downhill from that point. If we then try to plot when did we have our first child, you see here we had it in 1967 with a a chance per cycle of 28, 29%. In 1987, then it would drop to 23%. In 1907, it would drop further. And now we are down at having our first child at a point in our life where our biology have been reduced to half compared to the most fertile period, or more correctly expressed, that we now having them at a time where we need to try twice the time that we did when we were most fertile. Of course, there's many reasons for this. Modern youth life is not always compatible with having children when our biology tells it. And I think it's important to acknowledge that there are many things that need to be changed, that need to be discussed if we are to change this. You have expectations and traditions within your family towards your parents. You have her friends, his friends, your friends. What do you do in your group of friends? There are expectation norms and cultures and careers in terms of the labor market, education, society. And there's a lot of things that we want to factor in our life when deciding when to have children. So when young people hesitate to start a family and to have children, the reason may be outdated perceptions in a changed world and a distorted societal priorities and expectations. We need to have societal conversations on norm, culture, on traditions in the context of reproductive planning and modern life. I think it's very important that we remind ourselves that assisted reproduction is not the solution. It's one out of several tools needed to help people who have fertility problems. And to finish off, I'll just say that it's not about how to get children, but it's about social and societal accept that having children in compliance with the limitation of our inborn biology should be a personal priority for most people. And children should be conceived at home. It's the nice way to have children, but even more important, the ability and the willingness to do so is an important marker of societal compliance with basic life equality. And with this, thank you very much, and back to you, Eva.
Thank you, Søren, for the very interesting introduction. Søren, we have some questions for you, and I think fertility awareness is important on different levels in the society. When you meet politicians in Sweden or in Denmark, do you feel that they have the knowledge they should have concerning fertility awareness issues? I mean, it's different aspects of fertility awareness, and we need to direct in different on different levels.
I think that the politicians are human beings like the rest of us, and they lack the knowledge like most of us do. What I hear and what I see is a willingness and an acknowledgement that this is a huge problem. But at the same time, as a politician, you're trapped in a scenario where addressing this issue can cause a lot of anger because you're perceived as the state interfering in personal life. So I think it's very difficult for the politicians to find ways to start addressing this. And I think that we should discuss if we can initiate some of these debates, some of this talk outside the political environment, but with the politicians tapping in and participating in the debates going on. Otherwise, it will very soon be a very, I think experience shows that it can easily be a very aggressive discussion and not a constructive discussion where people react towards the state and the politicians trying to decide in your personal life. And this is not what it's about.
Thank you, Søren. Also, if you think 10 years ahead, do you think the family rate has changed in Sweden and in Denmark?
Yes, I do. But my problem is I don't know whether it's gone up or it's gone down. And I think that's why it's so urgently important that we start to addressing this now. And I think it's also important to recognize that this is not just a Danish or Swedish or Nordic problem. This is a problem for the Western countries in total. And right now, I mean, you are recalculating population, overpopulation that might end much less dramatic than we fear because of the fertility rates in the country. Some models right now says that in 80 years from now, the number of participants in Spain will be reduced by 50%. The number of people living in Japan will be reduced by 50%. So it's very dramatic, and it's very, very important for a lot of countries to unite and work with this, because the consequences can be very, very dramatic.
Yes, I believe so too. Well, thank you. I think we go further with the next presentation. Just have here. So thank you, Sarah. And we will come back to you when it comes more questions at the end. So please write questions in the Q&A section if you want us to direct questions to the speakers. So now it's time to introduce our first speaker, Kristina Mattsson. Kristina is soon a gynecologist in training at Skåne University Hospital in Lund, with a special interest in reproductive epidemiology and register-based research. Lately, she has been focused on chronic diseases and their potential impact on female fertility, to investigate if there are patient groups that might need increased fertility information. Now she will share her latest findings with us. Please go ahead, Kristina.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Let's see if this one moves on. It doesn't. Okay, there we go. Perfect. So I'm very excited to be here today to share the work that we've been doing the last year and a half and some of the main findings from that work. But I wanted to start by tying this together with some of the goals that we stated at the very beginning to sort of situate my roles and the research question within this framework. So what I've been working with is basically trying to identify groups that might be at risk for lower fertility that could maybe benefit from targeted information regarding fertility. And the reason for that is really quite easily summarized with these two pie charts here. So the one to the left is the sort of agreed upon causes for infertility, where about a third are attributed to male factors, a third to female factors, and the rest either a combination of both or unexplained infertility. The pie chart to the right, on the other hand, is the distribution of infertility diagnoses that are registered at fertility clinics in Skåne the last 20 years for women in their fertile age. And I want to draw your attention to the two top slivers, where we have unspecified in the green and unexplained after examination in the red. So these are, for over 40%, there's really no clear reason either found or registered for these patients. And just imagine that for another disease. Let's say 40% of patients with cardiovascular disease with a completely unknown risk factor profile as to why they suffered their disease. So that really intrigued me. And I was thinking, could there be other diseases contributing to this infertility apart from the gynecological and andrological conditions that we already know of? So when I show this right-hand picture to my colleagues, I got the very relevant objection, but isn't it just the age factor? So these unspecifieds, that are women with advanced reproductive age, which doesn't have its own diagnostic code. And I was thinking, yeah, maybe that's it. But take a look here. So that's the same picture. These are all women in up until 45 years of age. So keep an eye on the two top slivers, and as we stratify by age. So if we take a little jump down, it still looks fairly the same up until 35 years. The distribution is fairly the same. Taking another leap, up until 30 years of age, it's still the same. So these are women in their 20s, and the unspecifieds and the unexplains are basically the same. And maybe I'm mistaken here, but do we expect that for 40% of women before they've turned 30, that is an age-related infertility? And maybe we do, but to me at least, it's something that needs to be investigated further. And even though I need to make the reservation that these are diagnoses registered in the real life clinical setting, so there might be a lot of reasons for miscoding or misclassification, to me, even so, this is a very strong argument for going further into this question. So where to begin then? Which diseases to investigate? Should we investigate the severe diseases, the common diseases? I obviously think both, but looking at the research gaps, a lot more has been done on the severe diseases, such as fertility after cancer or cancer treatment, but there is an extreme paucity of data on other common chronic conditions in this age group. So this is a picture that I've borrowed from one of my colleagues to sort of show the prevalence of common conditions in the fertile years. And I want to draw your attention to the prevalence figure to the left here, that in Sweden, for women aged 18 to 39, 13% of them suffer from doctor-diagnosed asthma. 13%, that's a lot of women. So what about diabetes? Why does that matter in relation to infertility? Well, for type 1 diabetes, fertility issues for this patient groups are fairly well investigated. And before the advent of insulin, these patients very rarely even got pregnant. And even after decades of improvement in the clinical management of these patients, they still face an increased risk for pregnancy loss, malformations, other complications during pregnancy. However, their fertility rates have normalized in the sense that they're now the same as for people without diabetes. So I was thinking, how does it look then for women with type 2 diabetes? But first the question was, do young people even have type 2 diabetes? And mind you, they do. So again, the picture on the right is data from Skåne, and these are unique patients with diabetes. So it shows the distribution between type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes. And you can see that in absolute numbers, there are actually more women suffering from type 2 diabetes in this age group. And the picture on the left shows a little bit of what we might expect here. So these are age-specific incidents of newly diagnosed type 2 diabetes in both sexes under the age of 40. And you can see quite the worrying development with a steep increase in the incidence over the years. Okay, so common is one thing, but if there's nothing to show that these diseases would have the ability to influence reproduction, it wouldn't really be relevant. However, the little data that is out there shows that they actually might. So type 2 diabetes has been associated with irregular menses, longer time to pregnancy, lower egg reserve, a lower success rate after embryo transfer, whereas asthma has been associated with an increased risk of pregnancy loss as well as needing assisted reproduction to conceive. However, when scrutinizing these studies, there are a lot of problems and unresolved questions. For type 2 diabetes, there are extremely few studies. The ones that are out there usually investigate indirect measures of infertility. They rarely can discriminate between type 1 and type 2 diabetes, and it's been very difficult to attain a sufficient number of individuals for these studies. And there are actually no studies investigating the chance of birth for these women or the risk of infertility. For asthma, the few studies that are out there showing consistent results, it's usually based on self-reported asthma, and the risk of clinical infertility is not very closely investigated. So that led us to the research questions that we were working around, which were basically to characterize the reproductive outcomes for these two patient groups using the reproductive outcomes defined here in the right-hand list. So for the investigation of these questions, we have access to a unique material in Skåne, namely the Skåne Healthcare Register. And what this is, it's really a register registering all healthcare consultations for the whole population in this region from 1998 and onwards. So that means all care is captured. So it means all caregivers at all care levels. So, and that is really important. So apart from specialized inpatient and outpatient care, we also have access to primary care. And as many of you know, this is absent in a lot of, in the other national patient registers. And this is extremely important because the majority of care in Sweden is provided at this level. And for a lot of the diseases, such as, for example, asthma and type 2 diabetes, almost all of these patients are handled on this care level. So the register registers diagnosis and procedures, but it doesn't contain any individual level anthropometric data or lifestyle related data. So the question is then, how does it look for these patient groups? So here are the risk ratios for different reproductive outcomes for patients with type 2 diabetes. And you can see still that there are not that many women with diabetes, and that is because we were very strict in the sense that we wanted them to have their first diabetes diagnosis before the start of their reproductive journey. So we didn't want patients with gestational diabetes or diabetes afterwards intermingled with these patients. And you can see that compared to an age and calendar year matched reference populations, they had a markedly decreased risk of ever becoming pregnant as well as giving birth, and as well as a higher risk of pregnancy loss and suffering from infertility, and markedly an increased risk of suffering from infertility that was not overcome by a subsequent childbirth. And you can see that the right-hand column is adjusted for obesity and PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome, which are two major comorbidities for this patient group. So these two diseases could not explain away the findings that we have here. And obviously the register does not record when the people started trying to become pregnant. I have made a proxy for that to sort of at some way introduce age at the reproductive outcome that we have here, but that did not explain away the findings either. So it's not that women with type 2 diabetes systematically start trying for children later, and we did not have a hypothesis that they would either. So what this means in reality, this fertility level is on par with the fertility for women with type 1 diabetes 40 years ago. For asthma, these are the corresponding risk ratios, and these are preliminary results, so please take them for just that. And here we see that there is no difference in the chance of ever becoming pregnant as well as the chance of giving birth, but there is an increased risk of pregnancy loss as well as infertility. And this sort of can be summarized as it seems like, okay, so there doesn't seem to be a really decreased risk in the ability to get pregnant, but there might be a lower chance of maintaining a viable pregnancy. So this cohort was a little bit bigger, so we could go into more detail in terms of what infertility diagnosis in the N97 chapter in the ICD system that they actually suffered from. And we can see that they had an increased risk for many of the different infertility diagnoses. And I don't want you to worry about the two bottom ones, male factor infertility and social factor, because that are just cohort effects. So when I adjusted for calendar year, those diseases were no longer present, unlike the other ones that remained. And lastly, the need for assisted reproduction. So for these analyses, we've removed all the social and male factor infertility as well as adjusted for obesity. And we can see on average an increased risk with about 50% in the need of assisted reproduction to conceive. So where do we go from now? Obviously, first I need to say that these are very new findings. The research field is just in its beginning. So these studies need to be replicated to see if these findings hold in a different population with different data. it would be very elucidative to investigate these questions in other cohorts with the access to anthropometric or lifestyle related data. Maybe the coming Rubik, the big cohort that is established within ReproUnion. From a clinical point of view, it would be very interesting to see if there could be an effect modulation depending on diabetes or asthma treatment, as well as if there would be a possibility of performing an intervention study to see if optimizing, for example, blood glucose levels or something like that would have an effect on the success rate for our treatments. So I wanted to leave you with these concluding remarks, or rather this concluding question, whether fertility information or examination should be included in the clinical follow-up of young patients with these diseases, just as we keep an eye on their blood lipid levels or their eye or foot status. And obviously, I'm aware that a clinical guideline is not changed after 1 or 2 studies. So this is not really a question until more replication studies have been done. But I think that my take on this is really that the challenges with communicating these things have a lot to do with hitting the right tone and timing, and most of all, making the message really feel relevant to the recipient. I mean, we know it's relevant, but they have to have that same notion. And I think that at least for patients with a certain disease, that the likelihood that they would feel it to be relevant if they got the feeling that the information that they received were targeted to that specific patient group. So with that being said, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Christina, for a very interesting presentation. We've got a question for you. I think you did something. You told us something in the later part of your presentation, but I will tell you the question anyway. What does asthma do to fertility? Is there any complications in women's fertility? I was thinking that you could maybe more clarify.
Yeah. So I mean, there are not a lot of studies out there, but what we have so far is, and that agrees with my findings also, there is an increased risk for pregnancy loss that has been noted in large studies. There are also other large, so it seems like, so asthma, there's the part of chronic inflammation where it's hypothesized that this chronic inflammation is not contained to only affecting the airways, but actually a systemic effect, which could include affecting the reproductive organs. There's also the aspect of the immune system with asthma, with a shift between Th1 and Th2 levels. And this is a little bit, goes a little bit beyond the scope of what we can go into here. But all in all, it seems like maybe the threshold for implantation might be a little lower, meaning that the implantation goes fairly easy, but that means also that embryos are implanted that aren't really viable and cannot be maintained until a live birth later on. So that is what has been noted. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you. I have another question. What is the advantage of using Skåne Healthcare Register compared to the few studies that have been done earlier, focusing on, for example, type 2 diabetes and reproductive outcome? Because it's, yeah, you have used the Skåne Healthcare Register.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. I think, well, the main advantage is that this is based on a real life non-differential setting. So it's not a situation where you have a selection bias into who participates in a clinical research study. In terms of these two diagnoses that I'm looking at, first of all, we have access to primary care data. So that means that we have a physician-diagnosed diabetes and physician-diagnosed asthma. So the earlier studies on on diabetes has either only measured one level of blood glucose, which is not at all equivalent to a diagnosis of diabetes, where you need either multiple measures or you need to measure the long-term sugar level, so to speak. And seeing that type 1 and type 2 diabetes are really different diseases that might affect fertility differently, it's really important to make that distinction. The other part is that's been really difficult for them to recruit patients with type 2 diabetes. So they're very small studies with little power to investigate these questions. In terms of asthma, a lot of the earlier studies has been based on an asthma ascertainment as, have you ever suffered from asthma, yes or no? And so that is also prone to a lot of other types of methodological problems when you ask your patients like that, and it's not based on a clinical registered measure.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And we will have time at the end as well for some questions. Thank you, Christina.
Thank you.
And I would now like to welcome Lone Schmidt, who is a professor within public health and infertility at University of Copenhagen. Lone has for 30 years conducted research within family formation, infertility, and assisted reproduction, and more recently within fertility awareness. Welcome, Lone. You may begin.
Thank you, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to present on behalf of Britt-Marie Hvid-Malling, who couldn't be here today, but Britt-Marie has performed and been the main contributor to the study. So we have made an interview study with men regarding family formation and regarding fertility awareness. We have already published 2 of the papers, and I will show them in the end of this presentation. So today I make focus on taking fertility for granted, a qualitative exploration of fertility awareness among young childless men in Denmark and in Sweden. The overall aim was to explore fatherhood intentions among childless men during the last educational year on a short-term or long-term further education. So we wanted to approach a man where they were in a similar life situation. They were going to finalize their studies and going to work afterwards. We had 3 specifically aims: to explore the factors associated with decision-making regarding having children or not, to explore their fertility awareness, their knowledge on fertility and risk factors for infertility, and to explore their reflections on supporting factors and barriers to an earlier family formation than the average nowadays. And in this presentation, I will focus on the second aim. We included 29 men from Denmark and Sweden, and we recruited them through their educational institutions and using snowball methods as well. And in Denmark, we also used a web page searching for participants for research project called Test Person DK. And they were all men. They were in their final year of education. They had no children, and they were all between 20 and 30 years old. They were interviewed individually, and all the interviews were transcribed in full length, and we used qualitative thematic content analysis for managing the data analysis. The sample were quite similar in Denmark compared to Sweden, except that in Denmark, we were not able to recruit as many men from short-term education as from long-term education. And it was not because we didn't make huge efforts to recruit more men with short-term education, but we were just not successful. Overall, the far majority of participants wanted have a desire for having children in the future. And in Denmark, the men said they wanted 2 or 3 children. And in Sweden, some of them wanted 4 children. And you can see here, the age span is quite wide between they desired a first child and also desired their last child. And what you can also see is that if they have a partner of a similar age, some men desire their last child at an age where a partner will no longer be able to have a child, except if they go to use egg donation. And as I said, I will not focus very much on the complex family decision making, because we have reported this in our publication called Doing It in the Right Order. But I will focus on one result I don't think we have seen before in other studies so clearly. And this was within the theme of optimal timing of parenthood, and with a sub-theme of influence from within the inner social circle, and here focusing on friends. And actually, few men had discussed family formation with their friends. In this study, many of the men have talked with their parents about family formation and having children, but very few men have discussed family formation with their own friends. And one reason they provided was that they did not want to ruin the image of themselves as young and spending time with their friends for many years to come. In other words, if they told their friends that they were going to become a father, it was also a way telling their friends that they wouldn't spend time together with them as much as they have done before having a baby. And so it was also a way to go away from their friends. And ideally, the men wanted to have children at the same time as their close friend. As Celia said, I think we are afraid of not fitting in. So on the other hand, it's very difficult to have children at the same time when you don't talk with your friends about having children. And some men said, if my best friend is going to have a child, I'm sure I will follow soon after. So there's also a huge aspect of notching in family formation. And when you see all the quotes, they are with names on, and if they start with an S, it's a men for short-term education, and with an L, it's men from long-term educations. And now I leave the family formation decision-making perspective and go to the fertility awareness. We started asking them about what they thought about their own fertility. Oh, I have problems. I can't see all my slides due to, sorry. Okay, then I can't read all the quotes, but I can also only see them partly. No problem, you can see it full screen. So we asked them about their own fertility, and actually most men are not giving their own fertility any thoughts, and the far majority were optimistic. Oh, actually only a few men were anxious about their fertility being poor. So overall, these men took their own fertility for granted. Leonardo says, not so many reflections. I just assume I can have children. Actually, I have never been tested, but I presume and I believe I can, and I hope I can. And Lars said, no, well, I have happily closed my eyes, hoping for the best that it will work, haha. And Lars was one of the few men being scared. I'm extremely terrified that it will be poor. I'm really scared. I'm so worried that I considered making an appointment to have it checked. So in general, the men took their fertility for granted and haven't thought much about it. Then we asked them about their knowledge regarding infertility risk factors. And I have to remind you that this was qualitative interviews. They were not provided a list where they could choose for and select the factors they believed were risk factors. So they have to came across during their minds to find out factors they believed could be related to infertility. And in general, as in many other studies, the knowledge of risk factors was low. And participants were able to mention, in general, only 1 or up to 3 risk factors. Sager said, personally, I think that if you are physically active, eat relatively healthy, and do not use too many substances, hence, I believe that your fertility would be at a reasonable functional level. And Leif said, I'm convinced of living healthy has a great impact, both to have a healthy diet and stay healthy yourself, physical training. And Lars said, it's primarily smoking, this is not good. And when we categorized the risk factors the men mentioned, it was the largest was about health behavior. And all the risk factors they mentioned there, the different risk factors the majority of them are risk factors for infertility. However, they thought that living healthy is securance for having a high fertility. And this is of course not the case. We all have a fertility potential, and we can protect our fertility potential by not being worse, by living healthy, but it's not a guarantee that living healthy is equals high fertility. Some of the men also mentioned factors beyond personal control that could be environmental risk factors, for example, endocrine disruptors. This was only mentioned among Danish men, not among any Swedish men. And also the majority mentioned age, and they had quite good knowledge that fertility decreases with advanced age for both women and men. However, despite that knowledge, they also believe that men can reproduce throughout life. And what surprises us was that no one mentioned sexually transmitted infections as a risk factor, and also no one mentioned anabolic steroids. What was obvious in this qualitative interview studies was their uncertainty regarding their knowledge, and they were aware themselves how uncertain they were. They said, ooh, maybe, I think, could be. They often laughed or giggled. Lars said, I don't know, I have no clue. Do you mean things like riding your bike too much, or, I absolutely no clue. Leo said, yes, everything, I think. Well, everything we do, smoking, you hear that, right? Also, I believe alcohol. And Sigmund said, oh, I actually don't have a clue. No, I really don't know. Unfortunately, I can't answer this question. I have not thought about it. A lot of the men said that they were aware that they didn't know anything on this topic, and they found it very important to have this knowledge. And they suggested a lot of different settings for educational interventions. They mentioned preschool, and they discussed high schools, whether that would be a good or bad time. Would people laugh too much when they were between 17, 18 years old? They suggested the mid-20s. Some suggested information sent to them privately at home. Some suggested different forms of public campaigns, and some suggested potential websites with concise information and marking the most important risk factors. So to sum up, the participants had in general not reflected upon their own fertility and took it for granted. The majority took it for granted. And both men with long and shorter educations lacked knowledge in fertility risk factors affecting men's and women's fertility. No one mentioned sexually transmitted infections as a risk factor or anabolic steroids. The participant had a fairly good understanding of age effect on male and female fertility. Despite this, they believed that men could father children throughout their whole life. And their knowledge was really insecure, uncertain, and the participants were aware of that. And the study participants decided to achieve relevant knowledge of fertility and infertility risk factors and suggested different educational interventions to provide that knowledge. So overall, this study contributes to being more aware that the knowledge of risk factors may even be more limited than we are able to measure in survey studies where people can guess. Here they couldn't guess. They were not provided a list they could put crosses on. So the next step is to develop educational interventions in order to increase people's knowledge. And if you want to read more from these studies, we have these 2 papers in Human Fertility published during the summer 2020. One on doing it on the right or in the right order, which is a family formation decision, and this one, taking fertility for granted. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Lorna. Very inspiring and interesting. We have a question for you, Lorna. How can we educate the men, and when should it be done? What is your thought about that?
Yeah. I think we should educate emerging adults, both men and women. I think we should educate it as a part of the usual curriculum during high school. I think we should start early in school, just mention something very, very shortly about family formation. And when they have started to become sexually active and emerging adults, have it routine in the curriculum in high school and other educational institutions for youth. And then, of course, also provide web pages with specific information that could be grateful if that could be arranged through authorities like the National Board of Health, for example. I think it should be integrated together with the teaching in sexual education.
Yeah, good. Thank you. I have is this type, I have another question, so it's difficult for me to have to read everything. So is this type of information relevant at the time of normal sexual education?
At least we have conducted a lot of smaller studies now, qualitative interviewing young men, and this is what they told us. They want to have, they say, why do we learn everything about our body? We know how the heart works, what the kidneys are doing, but we don't know how our reproduction works. And that's really a blind spot in our knowledge, fundamental basic knowledge regarding our bodies. So it's my advice is given on the basis of what we know from the number of studies we have conducted during the last 5 years, focusing on men because we know so much about women and family formation. And now we know a bit more about men, at least from Nordic welfare countries.
Yes. Thank you. I have some more questions. What are the role of the parents to the young people?
I think one of our roles are not to continue to say, you can always have children, enjoy your life before, you can always have children. And we should start to discuss much more about making better possibilities for combining educations and starting a family for those who want to have children earlier. I just realized in Denmark now that when you are a student and have children, and when your children are sick, it's counted that, and you take care of them, it's not counting that it's a children's sick day, but it's counted that you are sick from your education, and it gives you huge problems. So much more flexible educational systems, and probably also tell your children that something of the very good things in life is to have children. And it's a huge pleasure and not just a lot of work.
Another question here is, as you already mentioned here, is should we educate the parents in order for them to be able to educate their sons?
Yeah, and that could, of course, also be backlash, but based on this interview study, it was really obvious that the young men discuss their own family formation with their parents. So it could be a good target point to educate the parents that it can be too late to start a family.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Lorna. We will come back with more questions at the end.
Okay.
Thank you very much. We will go further in the program, and next we have Maja Bodin, a midwife and PhD in reproductive health. Maja is an interdisciplinary researcher focusing on reproductive health, reproductive decision making, and gender issues. She is a postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Sexology and Sexuality Studies at Malmö University, and she will share her result from the qualitative study of Challenge 5. Maja, welcome. Please start your presentation.
Thank you, Eva. So, thank you. And as Eva said, I will now talk about what we have found out through Challenge 5's interview study. And we who are working with this study is, except me, Eva Elmerstig, Lars Plantin, Lotta Holmström, Lone Schmidt, and Søren Sibe. And I will soon tell you some of our interesting findings, but before that, I would like to repeat what we mean by fertility awareness. So, as Søren already told us, according to the International Glossary of Infertility and Fertility Care, fertility awareness means the understanding of reproduction, fecundity, fecundability, and related individual risk factors. So this means awareness of things like advanced age, that this affects fertility, sexual health factors can affect fertility, and lifestyle factors such as smoking and obesity. But there are also these non-individual risk factors that one could be aware of, such as environmental and workplace factors. But it's not only about these medical aspects. It's also about the societal and cultural factors affecting options to meet reproductive family planning. And this combination is what we have been looking at in this interview study. It's really the important stuff. So the aim of this study was to find out more about people's knowledge and beliefs about fertility, but also the social and cultural factors that affect reproductive decision-making. And what's new about this study is that we did not only want to know what young people think, but also what older generations think, and thereby gain knowledge about how awareness and beliefs have changed over time, along with the changes in society. So, what we did was that we let people discuss timing of parenthood, preconditions to parenthood, and their fertility beliefs and experiences. We had in total 26 age-specific focus groups, which means groups of 3 to 6 people on the same age, sitting together and talking. And in total, 110 people participated, and they were 70 to 90 years of age. And the discussions took place in Skåne between September 2019 and June 2020. So, what did we find out? Well, regarding fertility awareness, we found that most people believe that what affects overall health also affects fertility, just like Lorna just told us. And this is true to some extent, but it's not the whole picture. And something that was mentioned repeatedly was that emotional stress directly affects fertility in a negative way. And this is something that the available literature doesn't support. And it could therefore be regarded as a common fertility myth. Few participants had actively thought about their own fertility, except those who had experienced themselves or had a relative who had experienced fertility problems or cancer in the reproductive organs. Excuse me. Generally, women more often had actively thought about their fertility than men had. As for the generational differences, fertility myths were more common in older days. And this likely has to do with the fact that there was less research done on fertility, but also that the society looks very different today when it comes to information. We now live in a very different information society. So the research that was available was not as available, easily available then than it is today. So the younger generations, they knew how to search for information, and they usually used 1177, which is the website where you can find information about diseases and symptoms, and also contact information to all healthcare facilities in Sweden. But they also used social media to get information, and documentaries such as Sex Explained at Netflix. Interestingly, neither younger or older generations had learned much about fertility in school. And here is what one of the young men said about this. I think it's strange that you have not learned about this in school. So it should definitely be part of the education in school. If you want to improve fertility, you have to know about it. I can only see for myself. This is not something I know. It's something that I learned when you told a little and my friend told a little, but it's nothing I've read about myself. So I have no overall picture in any way, which I think is strange. When I left the school system, I should have known more. And then, after the school system, what strikes through then? It's not that damn much, because there's all that noise. So this is very interesting. It contains a lot of information, both about what you expect to learn from school, but also how much information we have nowadays in society. It makes it difficult to find information about this when you leave the school system. Okay. We also asked the participants to rank which factors they found to be most important preconditions to parenthood. And they were given 15 suggestions, but they could also add other factors that they found relevant. And overall, the most important precondition for all generations were to have found a partner, being in a loving relationship, and to feel mature before having children. So what does it mean to be mature? Well, this was usually explained as being able to plan and take responsibility, not being as egocentric anymore, able to see other people's needs, feeling materially and psychologically stable, and feeling done with doing other things. And here is a quote illustrating the wish to have found a partner to share parenthood with, how important it can be. When I was 21, I thought, what if I never meet someone to have children with? It was a relief for me because I thought that there are a lot of other ways to have children. It will work out. And that's why I've had the idea ever since of having children by myself. And I had also thought that it would have happened by now. And I think the reason why it has not is that the more real it has become, the more I have been confronted with the fact that I really want to do it with someone. I have lived with this idea that I will do it myself when I feel like it, but the older I got, the more I have felt that is something I really want to do with someone else. And therefore I postpone it because I want to find someone to do it with. And this was a 33-year-old single woman. Okay, so the most important factors were finding a loving partner and feeling mature. And the least important factors, which might come as a surprise to you, since we heard that they were quite important in previous study. It's having traveled and lived abroad, made a career, having children at the same time as friends and siblings, and also that the world situation is stable. There were some differences regarding preconditions in relation to gender and age. For example, we saw that women were more likely to highly rank having a supporting social network. And people younger than 40 more highly valued a good economy, housing with a separate room for the child, a healthy lifestyle, and a stable world. While people over 40 more often valued a loving relationship higher. Furthermore, participants who did not have children had many more preconditions than parents had. And they found it, important to have traveled, and good economy, secure employment, housing with separate room for the child, permanent housing, a healthy lifestyle, stable world, and having a supporting network as important. And it could, of course, be that all the participants have forgotten the preconditions they had before they had children, if it was a long time ago. Or that they, of course, have changed their minds after having had children, when they realized that some things are not that important as they had thought. But the differences between generations were also reflected during the discussions in several ways. And all the generations expressed that they were concerned about how the younger generations planned too much. Here is one example of this from a group discussion. Anna, 65, says, having children today seems to be much more like a project to young people, I think. There are many pieces of the puzzle that must fall into place before they even think about having children. And Britta, 62, continues, I think it's very planned. Katarina, 66, says, it's an entire company. At least that is what I see with those I have, my own grandchildren and nephews. Oh my God. Before the children came, everything should be ready. I almost think it's a bit, I feel uncomfortable, if I am to be honest. And also the younger generations talked about how much that needed to be done before they could start a family. That the requirements and expectations on parenthood were higher, and that insecurity in the labor and housing market contributed to a postponement of parenthood. Okay, so which of these results could be used in practice, you might wonder. Well, the focus here is on education in school. And the education about fertility could be much improved in school. This is not only something that we believe, it's also something that the participants themselves asked for, as you saw in one of the quotes, and as you also heard from Lorna. There's also a widespread belief that emotional stress negatively affects fertility, and also to some extent a false belief that modern legal abortions negatively affects fertility. And younger generations also have poor knowledge about the relationship between STIs and fertility problems, as Lone also showed us among the men. And this is really surprising, sorry, considering the masses of information youngsters get about safe sex today. So apparently, sexual education is much more focused on how to avoid pregnancy than providing information about how fertility works and how you can take care of your fertility. Okay, this was some, but not all, of course, of our findings. And if you're interested in knowing more, keep your eyes open for our coming publications. And I'm now happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Maja. Very inspiring. I will have some question here. I think it's okay, even if you have a cold. It's okay. You have a huge qualitative data material with a wide range in terms of age. What do you think is the strength of this variation of participants? Because I don't think there are so many studies who have done this before.
No, exactly. So this is quite rare, as you said, and I think there are two strengths in particular. The first one is that we get a better understanding of how society has changed over time, both in terms of the social norms and values, but also how medical technology have changed and developed, also how laws have changed, and how all these factors have changed people's fertility awareness and family planning. And the second strength, I think it's that, well, we can look at the interaction also between the generations. They are not in the same groups, but they talk about each other. And by this, we can learn more about how generations communicate about fertility and reproduction, and also how they pass on values and knowledge. So it's very interesting in two different ways, I believe.
Thank you. I have another question here. Did you get, and it's connected to the other question, did you get any idea if there is a dialogue between the generation? Does the young seek the older advice, or are the older too eager to inform the younger?
No, I think in most cases the younger they don't talk so much about their family plans until they are pregnant, and then maybe they talk a lot to their mother or so, and then they start talking. Or if they have problems and they have to go through IVF or so, then they might start talking. And the older generations, they try to keep out of this decision making and not have all this advice until the child is born, and then they can give a lot of advice. So I think it's what I mentioned, it's mostly mothers who have experienced difficulties, like or cancer in the reproductive organs. They talk more with their children about reproduction, so that their children are more aware that these things could happen. But usually when there are no problems, there's not that much communication, preconception between generations.
Thank you. One more question here related to your presentations. So the attitudes towards having children change dramatically once you have children?
Well, I can't say if it happens to everyone. I'm just speculating that the reason to why people who don't have children yet, that it might have more preconditions or see more difficulties nowadays ahead of them, like things they need to do before having children. And maybe when you have had a child, you realize that you maybe didn't need all these things. So that's just one of our ideas to why it might also be very different between the younger and the older.
Mm. And thank you. And another question about taboos. Is it still difficult to talk about family formation today as it has been, or is it easier today? The media attention is rising.
It seems to be a lot easier. It was much more taboo before. The oldest participants talk more about shame, for example. That you should be ashamed of yourself if you got pregnant before marriage, for example. And yeah, it was more like you put a lid on things, and the parents solve their children's problems in different ways. So it's definitely more acceptable to talk about it today. And also the participants who have experienced fertility problems, some of them are really active in talking about their problems that they have had with their relatives and friends to try to stop the taboo and try to make it more of a neutral conversation.
Yeah, thank you. And we have one more question before we go and let all of the speakers have questions as well. But one question here is, why do you believe there is this difference between generations in terms of planning and outer circumstances that need to be in order before starting a family?
Well, there are several changes that have happened in society, as I spoke of, and we have become more of planners generally. It's not only family planning, it's planning your life. We believe today that we can plan our lives in a different way than before. And we live longer, which also is something that the participants mentioned, that they expect to live longer and they expect that each life stage should be longer. And they want to fill it with a lot of things and so on. So there are many changes in attitudes and also education and so on that has contributed to this change, I think.
Yes. Thank you very much, Maja, for...
Sorry about the cold.
Pardon?
Sorry about me coughing.
Yeah, but you are in a safe distance. That's good. So we will, I have to say thank you all. And now we have gathered some additional questions to the speakers. So we will be happy to take in more questions or comments in the Q&A section. But please remember to address your question to the relevant speaker. So now it's we invite all the speakers and to answer some of the questions. I will start with one question here to Sören and Lone. And the question is, sperm banks meet young men every day with low semen quality. Do you have a suggestion on how we can communicate to these men that it's important to be aware of their fertility and that fertility treatment may not be a solution in the future when they wish to become fathers? So
Well, I can
address to
start out,
Sören and Lone.
I think it's I mean, being a sperm bank, you perform a sort of diagnosis on the men and their sperm quality, and you will, of course, be facing a lot of men who has a compromised sperm quality that might impact the rest of their lives in terms of family building. And I think that that if you engage in doing these kind of things, you have a responsibility to have to inform these young men, not only after they have donated their sperm or applying to become a sperm donor, but also prior to engaging with a sperm bank, so they know that when you donate sperm, you might actually get a negative result concerning yourself and your own prognosis for having children. So a lot of this information should be done prior to engaging with the sperm bank. And if you find very low sperm counts with men, then you would need to refer them to specialists who can go more deeply into the reasons behind this. Lone, you're welcome to add.
Yeah, I agree. And probably also inform them beforehand how frequent it is to have poor semen quality, that 25% of Danish men have low semen quality, and an additional 15% have so low semen quality when they are 20 years old and healthy that we expect they might need fertility assisted reproduction to have children. So it should also, on the other hand, also be a balanced information that this is a very frequent situation and they should be referred further to a specialist if they want to.
Maybe I could just add, or rather I would like to take this opportunity to address this about one prognosis, the man's prognosis versus the woman's prognosis and so on. I think that very often we are very focused on individuals here, but I mean, children are something we're going to have together. So the men's sperm quality is part of the woman's prognosis in a relationship, and the woman's age or biology is part of the men's prognosis. So I don't think it gives meaning to say men's prognosis or women's prognosis, because we have children as a couple. And this is extremely important to realize, both when you plan for your own life in terms of having children, but also when we talk about this on a societal level, that rules and regulations should support people, couples, in having children. And it doesn't make so much sense of talking just about how do we improve a woman's fertility, for instance, without addressing the men. The men is also part of the female prognosis and vice versa.
I agree, and would also add that when we are looking at single women seeking fertility treatment, we have for years only saw them as women in the need of having access to semen, donated semen. But we have now found out that many of single women also have their own infertility problems. So just to be aware, because you are single, it's not equals to high fertility.
Yes. Well, thank you. I have a question here. We will change a different perspective. I have a question for Christina here. Do we know if asthma medicine could have a negative impact on implantation or embryo development?
Very interesting. The one study that I did find that controlled for asthma treatment and investigated those groups separately in terms of severity of asthma and what the patients were treated with, it actually seemed like the women that had medication and thus had their asthma in better control actually had a better outcome. I think the outcome in that study, if I'm not mistaken, was time to pregnancy, but I must get back to that. But it seems really it's the disease rather than the treatment that is the problem. So that, I mean, that's reassuring as a medical doctor that treatment that we're giving is not additionally a problem. So that speaks for keeping your disease in check is a goal before fertility treatment or trying for conception.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I have some more question here, and this is question for anyone of you really. You mentioned that emotional stress is a fertility myth. I'm very curious about that statement, since too high or too low cortisol can really impact hormonal health and thus fertility. I don't feel it's correct to dismiss stress in any form and how it relates to fertility. So yes, please. I don't know which one of you who want to say something. Lorna is so please, Lorna.
Yeah, one of the large studies we have on the possible association between stress and fertility is a meta-analysis conducted on studies among women in fertility treatment. And they measured the stress level, anxiety, depression, etc., emotional status before one single fertility treatment attempt, after, and they saw which women became pregnant. And there were no association regarding the stress level before the fertility treatment and the chance of becoming pregnant or not becoming pregnant. And that's one of the reasons I say that due to these meta-analysis that was very qualified, conducted, and with a large sample, at least when it comes to fertility treatment, where we know women are stressed during treatment, this association has not been proven. And of course, there are studies where the stresses are very huge. It's about war, it's about seeking asylum or whatever. So huge stresses are having an impact on fertility, but we cannot find it in this meta-analysis among women in treatment. And I see another following. Can you elaborate on the number of stress and divorces amongst couples in fertility treatment? Yes, we can. We have done a huge register-based national cohort study in Denmark, comparing more than 150,000 couples with couples in fertility treatment and couples without fertility treatment. And what we could see over 16 years, we looked for marital breakdowns, divorce rates, and breaking up from your partner. And what we could see was that the marital breakdown was similar as compared to couples not having been into fertility treatment. And we see also there's a little bit higher rate for marital breakdown in the childless couples, but that goes both for the couples that have been through fertility treatment and for couples that have not been in fertility treatment. So childlessness, whatever the reason for that, is a risk factor for marital breakdown. And it makes a lot of sense that many people will try a bit harder not to have a marital breakdown when you have children together. So it's overall convincing that there's no increased rates of divorce among people in fertility treatment compared to the age background population of couples. And we have never seen that before in a large national data set following people for 16 years.
Thank you very much. I think, unfortunately, we don't have time for more questions. So I will just close that one. So we will end on, first of all, a big thank you to our speakers and of course to all of you for joining us today. I hope that you enjoyed today's presentation and discussions. We would also like to draw your attention to our network and invite you to check out our website if you want to find out more about ReproUnion. Lastly, a kind reminder to answer the 4-question survey that will be launched on your screens shortly. And it's been a privilege to have been your moderator for today. And with this, we end today's webinar. Have a great day and welcome back to our next event.